you living? Wagwan. Grand Rising. You're good? How's things? How you stay? Live up. Walk good. Our speech is replete with phrases like these that speak to our interest in each other's welfare, which is rooted through art and orientation towards the good. While our enduring ancestral memories of enslavement contain terrors so awful they cannot be named, our refusal to be silenced by the unsayable has encouraged us to pursue what Gilroy references in the Black Atlantic as a politics of fulfillment, the idea that future society will fulfill the social-political promise of the present, and a politics of transfiguration, the emergence of a qualitatively different, new social-political order. Gilroy reminds us that the unsayable is not the unthinkable or the unexpressible, as we've seen in the presentations today. Amidst the silences, endless debates, denials and refusals surrounding slavery, there remains much that is known and much to be learnt about this aspect of the past. However, there is a growing sentiment amongst people racialized as black in Britain of being tired of black history being limited to discussions about slavery. I understand the frustration. It's not that this period of our history isn't crucial for our understanding of ourselves, and more importantly, for understanding the global, systemic, structural, and intersectional domination we live with that is Euromodernity. But rather, there is a need to recognize and engage other forms of knowledge and expression that help us to understand the fullness of the black experience. Indeed, the very orientation towards the good in black vernacular has always housed an invitation for us to reimagine our lives beyond the terror, beyond the trauma, beyond the unsayable. It is as much an invitation to journey into the future as it is an invite to the future to be with us in the now. Current manifestations of this notion of transfiguration are observable in the emphasis on black joy, black love, and black girl magic. These open up a more expansive set of questions about the black diaspora, about what we want our lives to be. The distractions, as Morrison would call them, of proving our value in the context of systemic oppression, state violence, poor housing, discriminatory healthcare, exclusionary white supremacist education, makes us experts in what we don't want. That this is neither the same as knowing exactly what we must overcome, nor as formulating a vision for what we want. As African-American science fiction and fantasy writer Nora Keita Jameson starkly puts it, quote, "How terrifying it's been to realize no one thinks my people have a future." Her new book's title poses a question: how long till Black Future Month? While Afrofuturism is a label yet to gain traction in Britain, interestingly because it's one of the few African-American frameworks that's explicitly diasporic in its vision and approach, this movement towards love and joy, very much like the success of the emblematic film Black Panther, speaks to the desire to expose the kinds of questions Afrofuturistic imaginary arises. Indeed, Black Panther leaves us with that perennial question faced by black people, from our enslaved ancestors contending with slavery's brutal hypocrisy, to our parents arriving here with aspirations to better their lives, faced with a very British welcome. How can we in the diaspora live good in the midst of intersectional domination? It's this notion of live good that I think is the most pressing discussion for us to have in Britain today. Wanting to live good is clearly not limited to people of African and Caribbean diasporas. How we should live is a fundamental human question people grapple with across time and space. However, as humans, we have labored far too long under Euromodernity's ubiquitous version of the good life, which valorizes the material, rejects the emotional and the spiritual, and seeks to control and exploit the environmental. Moreover, as Sarah Ahmed argues in her book, The Promise of Happiness, the Western notion of the good life is unavailable to racialized people. Indeed, under the tyranny of Euromodernity, founded on principles of Western philosophical tradition, which conceptually severs the good, and the good is understood as the ethical questions about the good life, from the right, which is understood as the social political questions and justice. Questions about what the good life is have, for us, been consigned to the state of intellectual luxury, first world problems, as I've often heard them so sardonically described. Understandably, the main thrust of our struggles has been concerned with the right, the justice, and the social political, but such that even normative articulations of these efforts, like the global Black Lives Matter movement, indict the baseline for the good as disturbingly low. We're still struggling to matter, and even that remains a contested claim. As Gilroy reminds us, that through myriad forms of creative cultural countercultural expressions, music, dance, literature, art, and so on, again, as we've seen, quote, black people had to fight, often through their spirituality, to hold on to the unity of ethics and politics, sundered from each other by modernity's insistence that the true, the good, and the beautiful had distinct origins and belonged to different domains of knowledge, end quote. What I'm suggesting here is that we need to delve deeper into the unified ethical dimensions of what movements like Black Love, Black Joy, to a different kind of future are calling for. My aim here is not to prioritize the ethical over the political, but rather to resist the Euro-modern severing of the ethical from the political, so that we can develop our own model of the good life, what I propose we call Liv Good, where Liv Good means intersectionally just conception of the good life. For what is good? For what good is a good life if it's unjust? You might be wondering at this point, in a world where it seems obvious that what we need is greater wealth, more success, better healthcare and education, dignified housing and jobs, etc., why do we need to articulate our own version of the good life? Why, in other words, do we need to have a conversation about Liv Good? Well, the answer is linked to the fact that we exist in a context of Euro-modern values, and in Euro-modernity, goodness equals anti-otherness. Consequently, not explicitly articulating our own version of the good raises at least three concerns. One, ideas and expressions of love and joy are understood as unrelated to justice. Two, we default to dominant versions of the good that necessarily entail our own destruction, like capitalism or imperialism in blackface. And three, we lack the sound basis for making decisions about public policies and life choices. So I believe we need a different paradigm, one that brings forth the implicit invocations of that future Gilroy described as being intuitively housed in our artistic expressions, and that unifies these ways of knowing with the explicit and intentional. In stressing a different paradigm, I do so without calling it new. So much of the work that foregrounds the urgency, necessity, and viability of such a paradigm shift has already been conceived, theorized, and articulated, and has been and is being practiced across many of our planet's countercultural spaces, including here in Britain. So I'm not attempting to prove, argue, or suggest a new discovery. Rather, I wish to invoke the lessons of our forebearers and their forebearers, while recognizing each generation must carry the torch on the next leg of the journey, even as we respond to the particularities of our own time. With this in mind, like a good academic, I was going to critically analyze two relevant trends we're seeing in Britain: capitalism in blackface and Black Love and Black Joy movements. I was going to tell you about how so much of our current conception of success relies on capitalistic notions of individual wealth. And like Cedric Robinson and Angela Davis, I was going to caution you about the racialized and gendered pitfalls of capitalism. I was going to tell you that a capitalistic model of success leads to our own destruction. And like Patricia Hill Collins, I was going to tell you that the celebration of capitalistic success gives rise to controlling images that are fundamentally at odds with our liberation. Moreover, I was going to extend these critiques to remind you that capitalism is not just about controlling people. Like Frantz Fanon, Sylvia Wynter, and Bill Lawson, I was going to tell you it's about controlling land and every living thing and the entire environment. Before moving on to Black Joy, I was going to end this section with a well-worded wake-up call. Just enough gravity and urgency, not too much accusation and judgment. That the biggest challenge in addressing our environmental crisis is reimagining this Western model of success and the excessive lifestyle expectations it gives rise to. To ensure my presentation was sufficiently balanced, not too biased, not too depressing, because let's face it, spending one's life in constant struggle is itself a struggle. I was going to critically engage with the Black Love and Black Joy movements. They clearly speak to a need for us to expand our focus. Like Lisa Palmer's most recent project, Creating Black Joy, I was going to illustrate that Black Love and Joy call us to speak to the spiritual dimensions of human existence. And like Robert Beckford, I was going to remind you that the spiritual must not be reduced to the individualistic or the apolitical. Given this desire for love and joy in the face of systemic intersectional domination, I was going to suggest, like Shirley Ann Tate, that we need to not ask why racism persists, but what conditions are necessary to end oppression. I was going to encourage us to consider what conditions enable love and joy to flourish. Indeed, like Charles Mills, understanding the totalizing force of Euromodernity as a political, epistemic and moral paradigm, I was going to raise a carefully constructed clarion call for us to advance a new, a different, an alternative ethical paradigm, one that can take the spiritual seriously and also reimagine our relationship to the material, to land, to environment and living things and food. And because it's apparently always necessary, I was going to remind you, like Sojourner Truth and Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde and Stella Dagsy and Beverly Bryan and Susan Scaife and Leith Dunn and Denise Noble and Jan Etienne and Althea Maria Rivas and Gail Lewis and Jacqueline Grant and Kelly Brown Douglas and Katie Geneva Cannon and Claudia Jones and Hazel Carby and Tracy Reynolds and Debbie Weeks and Anne Phoenix and Carol Boyce Davis and Melissa Harris Perry and Kimberly Crenshaw and Sadia Hartman and Patricia Hill Collins and Udine Barito and Rhoda Reddock and Patricia Mohammed and on and on and on. That addressing patriarchy intersectionally must be part of this new vision. But as I was writing this presentation, and I genuinely do have a whole different version of this paper, I had a minor meltdown. This is not necessarily uncommon for me. I'm shy and at best a reluctant public speaker. But the anxiety I have in addressing unfamiliar audiences is not fear of embarrassing myself, although I might well be doing that right now. And as Robert said, we only had 20 minutes, so what's the worst that can happen? But this meltdown, the meltdown this time, and maybe it's always been part of the stress of speaking for me, was the fear of the futility of my words, the pointlessness of all this education and training I have, knowing that so much more accomplished people than myself, many of them here today, have said whatever I might say, said whatever I might want to say, and said it better than I ever could. And yet we have not truly engaged with their ideas, with their minds, with their intellectual contributions, their work, and its practical implications and applications. The fear that no matter what I say today, the world we live in will remain the same ugly, brutal, oppressive, and depressing place it has been for decades, for centuries, regardless of how much of the incredible scholarship that has been written by us, no matter how many reports and testimonials and past stories attest to the mind-blowing scope and degree of human destructiveness, no matter how much we long for black love and black joy, they will continue to be an aberration, a blasphemy to speak of, even as we know it's black love and black joy that have kept us alive. But instead of wallowing in that nihilism, brought on by the possibility of presenting a more appropriately academic paper, I've decided to talk to you about this itch I have. I've got an itch that I've been trying to scratch for some time, and I wonder if any of you have the same itch. It's the feeling of knowing I can do great things, really make a difference, but somehow looking at my life and feeling I have not yet come close to fulfilling my potential, and worse yet, worryingly, whether I ever will. Maybe I'm having a midlife crisis. And so, having been unceremoniously ushered from my job 3 years ago, I decided to really take some time to figure out how to reach that itch. Lockdown and a quite severe encounter with COVID provided me with a permission to retreat that I needed. Never sleep on blessings that come in disguise. Many people look at my life and roll their eyes at the thought of me not having done enough. By conventional standards, I've accomplished more than many. My parents and non-academic friends don't quite understand what I do, but are sufficiently proud. Some, like my sister, might say that itch I'm trying to scratch is a matter of internal narrative, a distorted perception of self that fails to recognize or take time to acknowledge the good that I have done, a cognitive habit common among people who are ambitious like me. I don't disagree. So I pause, I acknowledge, I give due regard to my life thus far. I allow myself to feel proud of the work I've done and the lives I've touched. I've even learned to accept other people's praises and recognition. My sister actually bought me a trophy to get the message across. But I still have that itch. And for me, that itch is twofold. The desire to change the world for the good. I mean, really change it, like structural shifts, paradigm shifts, shift that impact entire groups of people globally. shifts that pastory will recognize, not because I have any desire to be famous, I really don't, and friends here will know I don't even like to answer my own phone. But I do want to have impact. And second, I want to have a fulfilling and fulfilled life. I want to laugh and love with all that I am, even as part of that structural shift necessary to make such a life possible for more than just a few. I don't want to pass through this plane wondering what if. However, my challenge is not a lack of desire, skills, qualifications, determination, know-how, self-esteem, or any of the things that one can readily pay for a course to get in life or a life coach to fix. My challenge is not a lack of professional networks or people who love me and value me. I'm not short on people who believe in my abilities or who are willing to open a door of opportunity for me. I mean, the reason I'm here at this conference is because of all the many people who have seen me, bet on me, supported me, given me a chance to shine, the two who are sitting here. And I'm grateful, I mean truly grateful for all those people, but I still have that itch. It took a while, but through lockdown-induced online dialogue between myself, Philip, my husband, and Errol Donald, someone who we met through these networks I spoke of, whom through conversations became a dear friend, I came out of that internal lockdown knowing ultimately that I must learn to live good. Live good in love, freedom, power, fulfillment, creativity, and joy. Live good is a way and a destination, a state of being, a method, a philosophy, an art. However, as people of the African Caribbean diasporas, Live Good requires us to develop that new, and I'm saying the not new paradigm of ethics, education, economics, health, psychological health, as well as physical, obviously, in order for many to live that reality, not just a handful. We need that transfiguration that Gilroy spoke of, a fundamental shift of how we approach our own existence, how we envisage and make manifest the good life. Our experience is often one characterized as struggle, a continual commitment to overcome, to persist in the face of unrelenting obstacles and hardship that are present in both the personal and the political. So in the global context of this intersectional domination, is it possible for our journey to be one that feels and indeed is uplifting, fulfilling, and brimming with love and joy, even as we grapple with loneliness, frustration, abuse, disappointment, anxiety, depression, heartbreak, and loss? I believe the answer is yes. As we march and jam forward on this oh so unforgiving journey, our lives do matter. They have meaning and purpose. We know why we are marching and jamming. We know we are marching and jamming as an expression of our freedom and the freedom of others, lifted by those who we know are marching and jamming with us and grounded by those who have marched and jammed before us. We know their paths, their testimonies, their triumphs are ours, and in that we know love and joy. We also know what will happen if we don't continue to march and jam on, and so we must. The challenge then, that itch, is to figure out how to march and jam in that love and freedom and power, fulfillment, creativity and joy, in the context of that intersectional domination. It is to know that we must not only reduce the impact of intersectional domination on our lives, but replace it altogether with a new global reality. Given the richness and complexity of who we are, it goes without saying Live Good cannot be individualistic, one-dimensional or static. It cannot be something that I alone determine. Live Good calls us to bring our talents, gifts, experience into dynamic interdependence, to show up, pure of heart, to envision it, to work for it, to test it, to live it, to feel it, to share it, to enjoy it, and to love it. Live Good offers a space for us to embark on this journey together. Live Good is an invitation to choose us and to keep choosing us until choosing us is no longer a choice but a way of life, our state of being, our reality, our truth, and our legacy. So consider this your formal invitation to the supper challenge. Supper is a framework developed by African-American businesswoman, ironically, Cornelia Shipley, to identify the specific, urgent, persistent, pervasive, expensive, and recognizable challenge before us, that too many people of the African and Caribbean diasporas with talents and skills and potential are underutilized, underappreciated, and unfulfilled in their professional and personal lives. My intent from this point is not to start thinking about how this clarity of this supper challenge can underpin a business plan for yet another black educational consultancy, although my lack of income didn't send me in that direction at first. But as I struggled through that process, which never did sit well with me, trying to come up with a business plan and how am I going to pay my bills, I realized there is no distinction between having a job within these toxic institutions and being called a so-called independent, because there is no such thing as living outside of intersectional domination. So instead of laboring against people and spaces that devalue us, that refuse to see and hear us, that use us and require us to defer our dreams, imagine supper transformed into a soul feast. Imagine doing all the great things you do in the company of others who get it just like you. Imagine sharing workspace and heart space where productivity doesn't compromise integrity and excellence is not the aspiration, it's just how we do. So let's pause for a moment and picture it. And I mean really pause. Close your eyes. Picture it. Imagine us together, you and me, you and your friends, me and my friends, and our families and our colleagues, our neighborhoods, our international connections, dreaming, planning, creating, laughing, loving, sharing time, resources, expertise, networks, power, music, and food. Imagine us, simultaneously, the fulfillment of our ancestors' promise and the promise of something better for our children's children, at once to be and also to bring about the conditions for us to all live good. Thank you.